Hello, my name is Caroline Rooney. I'm Professor of African and Middle Eastern Studies at the University of Kent. My lecture today consists of a short introduction to an arts documentary I made in 2014 called White Flags. Drawing on extensive fieldwork and research in Lebanon, White Flags is a project based on filmed portraits of individual Lebanese citizens from different backgrounds, reflecting on their respective trust-building initiatives in Beirut. This is in the context of post-conflict Beirut, of course. The film conceptually and artistically explores the importance of white flags in a country where the national flag has frequently had its significance appropriated, and where the variously coloured flags of embattled political parties have served to heighten tensions and divisions. First of all, I should like to point out that I made the film with my Lebanese research associate, Rita Sacker, and with Lebanese cinematographer, Johnny Hisham, because it was important for me to work with those who are intimate with Lebanon in terms of its recent history and in terms of topographical familiarity with Beirut. That said, I will speak here about some of the preoccupations that I brought to the project at the outset, as well as some of the preoccupations that emerged for me in the making of the film. My own research on Lebanon began with Osama bin Laden's claim that the reason for 9/11 was the 1982 siege of Beirut. It seemed to me that what bin Laden was asserting was that an oblivious America needed to be made aware of the trauma that the citizens of Beirut had suffered. And this was over the American-backed Israeli assault on Beirut to oust the PLO. This certainly explains the deliberate iconography of 9/11, that of planes exploding buildings, this constituting a visual echo of the Israeli jets that flew into Beirut in 1982 to bomb its high-rise buildings along the Corniche and beyond. It was as if bin Laden wished to force the Americans to experience what the Lebanese had suffered, this amounting to an attack on the self-centeredness of America. But if so, 9/11, as a mimetic act or compulsion to repeat, amounts to a very literal reenactment. And it may be added, you don't create empathy through making people experience the violence others have gone through. You create empathy through appealing to the imagination. However, it is the case that Americans who could not understand why 9/11 happened had little awareness of the legacies of trauma in the Middle East. Very little attention is given in the Western media to those who live in places devastated by war in the aftermath of conflict. The news is always the conflict itself, after which affected places get forgotten. The media moves on to the next conflict flaring up. So it may be said that the film constitutes itself as a kind of counter-narrative to this, along the lines of the following question. While the war on terror is going on between the West and the extremists, what else is going on amongst us out of the war's sight? When I say amongst us, I mean something along the lines of the approach of Ayman el-Dasuki in his recent book, The Intellectual and the People in Egyptian Literature and Culture. That is, el-Dasuki argues for intellectuals and artists who place themselves alongside the people, acting less as experts and more as concerned and involved citizens. It is this ethic of solidarity that I was keen to explore. In keeping with this, the film begins with a visionary passage from Mahmoud Darwish's poem, Mural, that strikes a chord for the whole documentary in terms of theme and mood. I'll read out the extract we used. One day I shall become what I want. This is your name, a woman said, and vanished in the corridor of her whiteness. This is your name. Memorize it well. Do not argue about any of its letters. Ignore the tribal flags. Befriend your horizontal name. Experience it with the living and the dead. In the excerpt from Darwish's poem, the line, "One day I shall become what I want," suggests both the melancholic sense of an as yet unrealized potential and nonetheless a utopian sense of hope. This seemed to be the right affect for the film, melancholic yet hopeful, which matched with the music of the track chosen, Ibrahim Malouf's Beirut, his musical portrait of the city, one that is sadly accepting and reflective, but without being defeated. The film attempts to be a visual counterpart to Malouf's musical portrait, as I'll try to explain. In Darwish's poem, to become what is desired depends on putting away the tribal flags in favor of what he calls your horizontal name. So the tribal flag may be seen as set up against the horizontal, and in the film the flags are typically displayed in elevated positions, as we can see here. The logic of a flag is totemic, the raising up of a symbol of kinship. But beyond this, it is not only a symbol of belonging, but a territorial marker of ownership. The group ideal is thus informed by a logic of private property. On the one hand, the group ideal has the civilizational function of uniting its members in a common purpose. But on the other hand, it is potentially aggressive in its privatization or monopolization of the communal and communally sacred. Members of a group may share in its privileges of ownership, but are also individually owned by the group as a regulative ideal. Tribal flags can function like brands or capitalist logos. Furthermore, in a sectarian context, they are invested with religious significance, while totems are more broadly valued in terms of the sacred. In reading literature about the civil war in Lebanon, a frequent observation I came across was that the symbols of religious belonging were themselves treated as sacred. This is similar to Marx's critique of commodity fetishism. For Marx, the commodity is merely a thing, but it is treated as if it were magically alive. Similarly, tribal flags have a fetishistic significance, or we could say shirk-ish significance, the term shirk being an Islamic one for idolatry, meaning that it is the symbol that is worshipped more than what it symbolizes. In other words, what is at stake in the territorialization of tribal flags and religious symbols is literal-minded performativity. The symbol of something is taken to be the thing itself. So this means that the group ideal becomes more important than the group itself. The symbol is treated as more real than reality. In order to resist this literal-mindedness and to return to the group as a reality and not a performative symbol, a poetics of the real is needed. White Flags therefore tries to create a picture of Beirut in a poetic way that might redirect us to the real as a question of what group peacescapes might be. What is a peacescape? Drawing on Freud's civilization and its discontents, a human peacescape, as opposed to a natural one, could be surmised to be a city or a town that is clean, orderly, utilitarian, and yet adorned with beauty. The Beirut that is seen in White Flags is not a picturesque Beirut. The Corniche is pretty much absent, along with the glitzy districts of the city. Rather, it is the Beirut that most Lebanese experience on a daily basis that is presented, a rather haphazard and scruffy city of hastily erected buildings, disrepair and traffic jams due to the lack of public transport. Although it is, in this viewing, a scruffy city, in the main, as many cities are, it is nonetheless decorated with capitalist logos and advertising, with tribal markers, including flags and with graffiti. For me, this urban writing entails different kinds of signs. So here's an advertisement I photographed in Beirut. What interests me about this photograph is that when I saw it, I saw that the lamppost had chopped off the original letters of the slogan, so it became ashionable area instead of fashionable area, and harming neighborhood instead of charming neighborhood. So coming back to the way in which this urban writing entails different kinds of signs, there are the signs that are advertisements in the sense that they seek to draw attention to themselves, self-centered signs. And then there are the signs that seek to advertise or make known something beyond themselves as signs. I call this latter kind of sign an ostensive sign, a sign that points to something other than itself. What I wish to suggest is that the white flag, as opposed to the tribal flag, is an ostensive sign. The tribal flag wants you to concentrate on it as the ideal, but the white flag presents you with a blank space. And this blank signifier or page opens up the freedom of the imagination for everyone. In that it is a case of what is for everyone, any inscription or image here would point to or seek out fellow images and inscriptions in the manner of graffiti. And here's some Beirut graffiti that there's really a lot of it all over the city. The film is constructed rhizomatically, or horizontally, that is to say, with respect to this group imagination, the horizontal name that Darwish refers to. The particular rhizome at stake could be called rebuilding civil society, while each individual interviewee is like a distinct blade of grass on this rhizome, distinct yet connected with the others. I did not approach the white flag with a preconceived notion of its meaning, and what was interesting for me was to see how each interviewee brought their own meanings to the white flag, as I'll indicate. It was on perceiving this that the editing structure of the film emerged as opposed to the script. I will now say something about each interviewee. Firstly, we have here Amal Makaram on the left. Amal Makaram is a humanitarian aid worker, and for her, the white flag points to national memory. If bin Laden's 9/11 message was, "Remember Beirut," he chose the wrong language for it. Amal created a peacescape by assembling politicians of different political parties in Beirut's Martyr Square under a banner calling for national remembrance of all the suffering, not just only of this group or that group. Her banner or white flag was eventually torn down, but at least she made a peacescape. For Chawki Azouri, the next interviewee, the white flag points to mourning, the universality of such. And in his work as a psychoanalyst, he helps his patients from different backgrounds through the processes of mourning, both private patients and patients at Hospital Mount Lebanon. For Jeanine Jalkh, a news reporter and columnist with L'Orient Le Jour, the white flag points to justice, especially socio-economic justice, and this is her vocation as a journalist. For Raouf Rifai, an artist, an urban planner, the white flag concerns the Darwish figure. So here are some of his work where he paints these Darwish figures. I should explain that in Lebanon, the Darwish is not just a dervish, but more broadly a carnivalesque figure embodying popular spirit, and can sometimes be a revolutionary figure. The figure of the Darwish is a white flag in challenging identity politics in favor of a common humanity. Finally, for Aurélien Zouki, a theatre director and performer, the white flag points to the arena of public conviviality. And he uses theatre and performance spaces to achieve this peacescape of festive togetherness across sectarian divides, as we see at the end of the film where he organises a street party. All these visions of the white flag can be placed horizontally beside each other in an open-ended series, to which you can add your own white flags, and you are welcome to do so. Finally, the white flag also seems to turn the boundary marker into a threshold you can cross. Apart from filming the streets of different neighbourhoods in Beirut, we filmed the interviewees in their homes and workplaces. But for all of them, the boundary between home and workplace was a porous one. Also, the boundary between the home, that is a workplace, and the street turned out to be a porous one, particularly as can be seen in the festival Aurélien organised as this big street party. So, coming back to where I started, the white flag should undo the logic of private property, both indicating where those on the streets can be taken into the home and cared for, and where the civilization of the home can be taken out onto the streets. Thank you very much for listening.